My name is Clara Richardson, and I'm a cardiologist at St. Mary's Hospital in New York. Every day at the hospital is a race against time, but I've never felt the pressure more than in early October 2024. It was a rainy morning when John Evans, a 65-year-old lawyer and social activist, arrived in critical condition at the emergency room. The ambulance sirens pierced through the constant noise of rain against the windows. John was rushed in, semi-conscious, showing clear signs of a heart attack. The emergency room turned into a whirlwind of action. "We need to stabilize him now," said Dr. Green, my colleague, with a tense voice. I rushed to assist him, our entire focus on saving John. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as we worked in sync. "Come on, John, stay with us," I murmured as I adjusted the monitors. We managed to stabilize him temporarily, but we knew this was just the beginning. After the initial tests, it became clear that John needed a heart transplant. His heart was severely damaged and wouldn't hold for much longer. The urgency of the situation was palpable, heightening the tension in the air. That same morning, as we dealt with John's crisis, I received a call from another hospital. They had a young mother, Sarah Collins, 30 years old, who also urgently needed a heart transplant. Sarah had 2 young children and a life story marked by resilience. An ethical dilemma began to form in my mind. 2 patients, 1 life or death decision. Reflecting on the situation, I remembered a fact that further complicated my position. Years ago, my family went through a devastating financial crisis, and it was John Evans, through his legal work, who helped us out of that difficult situation. My gratitude towards him was immense, but I knew I couldn't let that influence my medical decisions. The situation was becoming increasingly complex. As the day wore on, the pressure mounted. Media started sniffing around the story, adding to the tension. Reporters tried to pry information, and I needed to stay focused on what mattered, the health of my patients. Within the hospital, heated discussions began among the medical team about who should receive the available heart. "We need to consider John's contribution to society," argued Dr. Alan Carter, a respected veteran known for his thoughtful ethics, during an emergency meeting. "He has helped thousands through his work." Dr. Lisa Hernandez, a physician passionate about social causes, countered, "And what about Sarah's children? They need their mother. She has her whole life ahead of her." "We're not here to judge the importance of individual lives," said Dr. Green, trying to mediate. "We need to follow protocols and waiting lists." These discussions echoed in my mind as I tried to balance my professional and personal roles. I returned home exhausted, only to find more conflict. Mark, my husband, was grappling with the recent loss of his job, and our marriage was under strain. The long hours at the hospital and constant pressure were taking a toll on our relationship. "You're never here," Mark said, visibly frustrated. "Emma barely sees you, and I'm left alone dealing with everything." I tried to explain. "I'm doing my best, Mark. The situation at the hospital is critical. I can't just walk away." With restrained anger, Mark replied, "And what about us? When will you realize we're falling apart?" "I know it's tough," I responded, trying to hold back tears. "But this is my job. I need to be there." "Your job, Clara, is tearing our family apart," he said, before leaving the room, leaving me alone with my guilt. Those words echoed in my mind as I prepared for another day of impossible decisions. I knew I had to brace myself for the transplant committee meeting, where crucial choices would be made. I was torn between personal gratitude and professional duty. knowing each choice would have profound consequences. That night, as I stared at the ceiling of my room, I reflected on the challenges ahead. The rain continued to fall outside, a constant reminder of the turmoil both inside and outside the hospital. The next morning, I sat in the hospital conference room where the transplant committee gathered for another crucial discussion. I looked around the table, seeing the faces of my colleagues, each wearing a serious expression, reflecting the gravity of the decisions we were about to make. The weight of responsibility made my head throb. Dr. Alan Carter began to speak, his firm voice echoing in the quiet room. We need to consider the experience and wisdom that elderly patients bring. John, for instance, is a pillar of the community. He still has much to offer. My mind drifted to the past, remembering how John had helped my family during a devastating financial crisis. My gratitude towards him was immense, making my position on the committee even more complicated. Dr. Lisa Hernandez interrupted my thoughts. I understand your point, Alan, but Sarah is a dedicated mother. Her children need her. We have a responsibility to consider the impact on their lives. I tried to maintain objectivity, but Sarah's and her children's faces floated in my mind. It was difficult to separate the professional from the personal, and the pressure mounted with each passing moment. Clara, you seem distant, Dr. Carter said, pulling me back to reality. What do you think? I took a deep breath and replied, we need to consider the long-term impact of our decisions. Both patients have lives worth saving, but we must also consider who has the greater chance of recovery and benefit from the transplant. Dr. Hernandez shook her head, her face showing frustration. Clara, this is too personal for you. We need to be objective. Dr. Carter intervened. Lisa, everyone here has feelings involved. The key is to maintain clarity. The discussion continued with overlapping voices. Dr. Jameson from cardiology raised his voice. We're forgetting that John has a more stable medical history. He may withstand the surgery better than Sarah. Dr. Hernandez countered, but Sarah is young and has 2 young children. They depend on her. I felt the tension rise, and my phone began buzzing incessantly with news notifications. The media had caught wind of our dilemma, and now reporters were camped at the hospital entrance. The story was spreading quickly, and I could feel the additional weight of public opinion pressing down on my decisions. At home, the situation wasn't any better. Mark, my husband, was visibly upset. You're neglecting our family because of this job, he said, his voice filled with frustration. We can't go on like this. Mark, you know how important this is, I replied, trying to stay calm. We're talking about lives. We're talking about our life too, Clara, he exclaimed. We can't let your job destroy our marriage. I need you here. I tried to explain the complexity of the situation, but it seemed like every word I said only widened the gap between us. Do you think I don't feel this too? I'm trying my best. Our marriage was on the brink of collapse, adding another layer of stress to my already tumultuous life. The committee meetings grew increasingly tense. Heated discussions filled the air, with medical and ethical arguments colliding violently. Dr. Hernandez insisted on the importance of the young mother, while Dr. Carter stood firm on John's valuable contribution. We need to make a decision soon, Dr. Hernandez said urgently. Sarah is deteriorating every day. Dr. Carter shook his head. And John isn't doing well either. Every minute counts for both. I felt torn, stretched to the limit. The work, media pressure, and the deterioration of my marriage were consuming me. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, I wondered if I could continue to bear it all. At the next committee meeting, I felt the weight of all these accumulated pressures. Dr. Carter looked directly at me. "Clara, we know this decision is difficult, but we need your input." I took a deep breath, trying to find clarity amidst the internal chaos. "We need to consider the long-term impact of our decisions," I began, feeling the words come out with difficulty. "Both patients have lives worth saving, but we must also consider who has the greater chance of recovery and benefit from the transplant." Dr. Hernandez crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on me. "Clara, I know you know John personally, but we need to be rational. Sarah has 2 young children who depend on her." "I'm not denying that, Lisa," I replied, my voice slightly trembling. "But John also has a family and a community relying on him." Dr. Carter tried to mediate. "We need a decision based on data and protocols, not just emotions." Suddenly, my phone rang. It was the media again, pressing for a statement. I quickly left the room and answered the call. "Dr. Clara, the community is anxious for an answer. Who will receive the transplant?" I tried to remain calm. "We're working diligently to make the best possible decision," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm within me. "We understand the gravity of the situation and ask for patience and understanding." When I returned to the meeting, all eyes were on me. "We need to decide," Dr. Carter said, his voice determined. "We can't delay any longer." With a heavy sigh, I looked at my colleagues, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Let's do what's right," I finally said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. And with that, we knew the decision was imminent, each of us carrying the weight of our choices. I was at the hospital when my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice sounded desperate. "Clara, Emma has a high fever and I can't calm her down. What should I do?" Fear gripped me. "Have you tried giving her fever medicine?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Yes, but it's not working. She keeps crying," he replied, frustration evident in his voice. My heart sank. I wanted to drop everything and rush home, but I knew my presence at the hospital was also crucial. "I'll try to get there as soon as possible. Keep her hydrated and try to soothe her until I arrive," I said, feeling guilt gnawing at me. "Clara, we need you here," he insisted, his voice trembling. "She needs you." I hung up the phone and found myself torn again between my responsibilities as a doctor and my role as a mother. Sleepless nights, pondering over the transplant decision, and now worrying about Emma left my mind in turmoil. As I walked through the hospital corridors, Dr. Carter's and Dr. Hernandez's arguments echoed in my mind. John's experience and wisdom versus young mother Sarah, whose children depended on her. I couldn't escape the gravity of these considerations. In the final committee meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone awaited my stance. Dr. Carter broke the silence, his voice serious. "Clara, we need your perspective." "We know this decision isn't easy for anyone," Dr. Hernandez began, her voice attempting empathy. "But we need to follow the hospital protocol and the national waiting list." I took a deep breath and spoke, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to make the decision that benefits the most people in the long run. Despite all the gratitude I feel towards John, it's important to adhere to the established protocols." Dr. Carter looked at me with a mix of respect and sorrow. "I understand, Clara, but do you think this is the right thing?" I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. "There's no clear right or wrong here. We're dealing with human lives." But we must be fair. Dr. Hernandez sighed, looking down before responding. Clara, I know you know John personally, but we need to be rational. Sarah has 2 young children who depend on her. I'm not denying that, Lisa, I replied, my voice slightly trembling. But John also has a family and a community relying on him. The silence in the room was palpable. Everyone knew how difficult this decision was. After a few more moments of discussion, the committee agreed to follow the national waiting list. Sarah would be the heart recipient. The news was communicated to all involved. I felt a mix of relief and burden on my shoulders. Reactions were mixed. Some medical colleagues supported the decision, while others criticized it, questioning if it was the best choice. After the meeting, Dr. Hernandez approached me. Clara, I know this decision was incredibly difficult for you. I just wanted you to know that I respect your courage. Thank you, Lisa, I replied, trying to hold back tears. I just hope it was the right decision. Shortly after, news of John's death arrived. He didn't survive the wait. I received the news while still at the hospital. It hit me hard, as if I had lost a family member. Guilt and sadness overwhelmed me. I sat in my office, staring at the wall, reflecting on the loss. The media, as always, didn't make it easier. Headlines about the controversial decision and John's preventable death were everywhere. Criticism and support came from all sides. Mark called again. "How are you?" he asked, his voice softer this time. "I'm dealing with it," I replied, my voice choked up. "John didn't make it." "I'm so sorry, Clara," he said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt he understood the depth of my pain. I should have done something differently, I confessed, tears starting to fall. "You did what you thought was best," he said, trying to comfort me. "No one can predict these things." "I know, but the guilt is inevitable," I replied, my voice faltering. "I failed him." "Clara, you did what you could. You're only human," he said, and I found some comfort in his words. The following days were a blur of interviews, statements, and attempts to justify the decision. I faced harsh criticism, but also received words of support from colleagues and even strangers. Dr. Carter approached me, his face serious. "Clara, we need to learn from this. Every decision we make has a huge impact." "I know, Alan, and this will never leave me," I replied, feeling the weight of responsibility. As I walked through the hospital corridors, I felt a deep sadness. John didn't survive, and this loss would stay with me forever. But I knew I had to continue, for my family and for the patients who still needed me. Days later, I sat in the worn leather chair of the conference room, feeling the weight of accusatory stares around me. The hospital's ethics committee consisted of familiar faces, but at that moment, they seemed like strangers, cold and distant. Sarah and John's case had strained my relationship with the hospital administration, and now they were accusing me of a medical error in an old case, strategically resurrected after the recent turmoil. "Dr. Clara, could you explain to us the decision made in the case of patient Collins?" Dr. Hendrix's voice was dry and inquisitive. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. At that time, based on the available information and the critical condition of the patient, the decision to administer medication X was the most appropriate. I acted according to established protocols and consulted the multidisciplinary team. But there was a communication failure that resulted in the incorrect dosage being administered, correct? Dr. Lawrence, always incisive, asked. Mrs. Collins was in a critical state. and the dosage was adjusted according to her condition. Unfortunately, there was an adverse reaction that couldn't have been predicted, I explained, feeling cold sweat trickle down my back. You are aware that this decision could have been fatal? Dr. Hendricks pressed, his eyes fixed on me with a chilling intensity. Yes, I am aware, I replied, my voice almost faltering. But at that moment, I believed it was the best option available. The accusatory glances continued. It was clear they weren't just there to seek the truth, but to find a scapegoat. I felt a shadow of persecution hanging over me. After hours of interrogation, I left the room exhausted, my mind swirling with doubts and suspicions. I arrived at the small, lonely apartment near the hospital. Mark and I had decided to temporarily separate. He stayed in the large house while I chose the refuge close to work, symbolizing my emotional isolation. The distance between us was both physical and emotional. We needed time to reflect on our marriage and priorities. One night, as I entered the empty apartment, loneliness engulfed me. I called Mark. We need help. I can't do this alone, I confessed, my voice trembling. I agree, he replied, his voice laden with weariness. Let's seek couples therapy. The next day, we sat in the therapist's office. Dr. Emily looked at us with a welcoming gaze. Let's start from the beginning. What brought you here? Mark looked at me, waiting for me to speak first. I feel like we're growing further apart. Work has consumed our lives, and we've forgotten how to connect, I began. It's been hard to balance everything, Mark added, squeezing my hand. We want to find a way back to each other. I began volunteering at a mental health clinic. It was a different environment from the hospital, but equally challenging. Dealing with patients facing deep internal struggles helped me confront my own demons. I met Anna, a young woman battling depression. Her words resonated with me. Sometimes the biggest battle is with ourselves, she said with a distant look. I understand completely, I replied, holding her hand, but there's always hope and help. In one of our sessions, Anna shared more about her life. I lost my brother to suicide. Since then, I feel like I'm falling into the same abyss. I'm sorry for your loss, I said sincerely. The pain never completely goes away, but we can learn to live with it and find new reasons to move forward. The couples therapy sessions with Mark began to make a difference. We felt a renewed connection, as if we were rediscovering each other. We need to balance our lives, he said during a session. Our careers are important, but they can't be everything. I agree, I said, feeling a wave of relief. I don't want to lose you. Let's work on this together. We decided to adopt a more balanced approach to our careers and family life. The days of separation gave way to a new phase of reconciliation and mutual understanding. During one of our therapy nights, Mark confessed, I felt so alone without you. I didn't realize how much I needed us until we grew apart. I missed you too, I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. Let's make this work, together. In my reflections, I realized the fragility of life and the complexity of ethical decisions in medicine. The journey I faced taught me the importance of taking care of myself so I could care for others. The experience shaped me, forcing me to grow and confront my vulnerabilities. And above all, it showed me that even in adversity, there's always an opportunity to start anew. But I was mistaken if I thought everything was resolved. Sarah emerged from surgery with a new lease on life, and witnessing her recovery unfold was like witnessing a miracle blossoming before our eyes. Each passing day, she grew stronger. I remember seeing her take her first steps down the hospital corridor, a smile radiating gratitude and hope. "I can't believe I'm walking again," Sarah said, eyes brimming with tears. "You're a warrior," I replied, trying to contain my own emotions. "We all believed in you." A few weeks later, Sarah returned to the hospital, but this time not as a patient. She came to personally thank the medical team. Emotion filled the room as she entered, her presence bringing a contagious glow. "You saved my life," she said, voice choked with emotion. There are no words to express my gratitude. Sarah's reunion with her children was even more touching. I saw the joy on their faces as they embraced their healthy, vibrant mother. It was a scene that warmed the hearts of everyone present. "Mom, you're back," exclaimed her youngest son, hugging her tightly. "Yes, my love, I'm back and I'm not going anywhere," Sarah replied, holding back tears. I watched that scene with a deep sense of gratification, certain that all the hardships and tough decisions had been worth it. Sarah's story quickly spread through the media, highlighting the importance of organ transplants. I received numerous messages of support from people inspired by her journey. "Thank you for sharing this story. My faith in medicine has been renewed," read one of the messages. But life in the hospital is never without conflicts. Shortly after, a young teenager named Lily was admitted with a rare genetic disease. Her experimental treatment was only available in another country, and her family lacked the necessary financial resources. I discovered that Lily's father, Dr. Michael, was a respected colleague at the hospital. However, his actions were often questionable, complicating the situation further. Dr. Michael, visibly distressed, approached me in the hallway. "Clara, I would do anything to save my daughter, but I'm at a loss." "We'll find a way," I promised, though I knew it would be an uphill battle. Pressure mounted, this time not just from the media, but also from the medical community and hospital administration. The reluctance to financially support Lily's treatment was evident. I knew I had to fight for her. "We're talking about a human life," I passionately argued in a meeting with the hospital administration. Human values and medical ethics must prevail. The meeting ended with a knot in my stomach. Even after all the triumphs, I realized there were still many moral and ethical issues to be resolved in my personal and professional life. I looked at a photo of my own family, reflecting on the sacrifices and tough decisions that lay ahead. The journey was far from over, and I knew greater challenges awaited me. If you'd like to know the rest of the story in another video, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more compelling narratives. Thank you so much for watching the video sharing my story. It's a pleasure to be able to share a glimpse of my life as a doctor with you.